Good evening, everyone. Today we're analyzing President Trump's recent appearance in Pennsylvania, the first stop of what the White House has billed as a national tour focused on economic affordability. This event, held at the Mount Airy Casino Resort in Mount Pocono on December 9th, offers us a critical window into the administration's economic messaging strategy as we approach the 2026 midterm elections. Over the next 50 minutes, I'll walk you through what happened, what it means, and where this could all be heading. Let me start by setting the context. President Trump stood before a crowd of more than 1,000 supporters in a ballroom adorned with massive signs proclaiming lower prices and bigger paychecks. The stage was set for an economic message, a deliberate attempt to address growing concerns about affordability that have become a significant political liability for Republicans. But what unfolded was something more complex, more revealing about both the president's political style and the challenges facing his administration. The timing of this event matters enormously. We're nearly a year into Trump's second term, and polling data shows Americans remain deeply concerned about the cost of living. Recent elections in November saw Democratic victories in New Jersey, Virginia, and New York City, with voters pushing back against the administration's economic agenda. The White House clearly feels pressure, and this tour represents their response. They're trying to reshape the narrative before the midterms potentially flip the House. Now, let's talk about what Trump actually said during his speech, which lasted roughly an hour and 40 minutes. He opened with his core message. He told the crowd that his administration has no higher priority than making America affordable again. He claimed prices are coming down rapidly, that Americans are seeing lower prices and bigger paychecks, and that his policies are crushing inflation while delivering higher wages. He blamed the Biden administration for creating the affordability crisis in the first place, calling Democrats the cause of the highest inflation in history. This framing is crucial to understanding the administration's strategy. They're positioning themselves as fixers of a problem they inherited, not creators of new economic challenges. Trump repeatedly emphasized this point, saying the Democrats gave Americans high prices while his team is bringing them down. It's a simple message, one designed for repetition and easy comprehension. The question, of course, is whether voters are buying it. Trump brought local workers onto the stage to share personal testimonials about how his policies have helped them. A waiter and an emergency medical technician spoke about how eliminating taxes on tips and overtime would benefit their families when filing tax returns next year. These are tangible policy points, specific promises that connect to real people's lives. The administration clearly wants to make this concrete, to move beyond abstract economic statistics and show voters how they personally benefit. But here's where the event becomes more complicated and more interesting. Trump didn't stay on message. In fact, he spent significant portions of his speech veering away from economic issues entirely. He launched into attacks on Representative Ilhan Omar, a Democratic congresswoman from Minnesota, using derogatory language and prompting his supporters to chant about deporting her. He discussed immigration from Somalia, accused Democrats of making Pennsylvania a dumping ground for migrants, and made claims about his performance with Black and Latino voters. He talked about windmills, climate change, transgender issues, and even teased the possibility of a third term despite constitutional limitations. He claimed credit for the phrase "Merry Christmas" being used during the holidays. He touted the stock market's performance and boasted about his tariff policies generating hundreds of billions of dollars. At one point, he suggested Americans don't need so many pencils. This is what Trump calls the weave, his method of jumping between topics, but it raises serious questions about message discipline. Why does this matter? Because the White House had billed this event specifically as an economic tour focused on affordability. The signs behind Trump literally said lower prices and bigger paychecks. Yet he spent perhaps 15 minutes into his speech before even using the word affordable, and then, remarkably, he began mocking the concept itself. Multiple reports indicate he called affordability concerns a hoax and a Democratic con job, though he later walked this back slightly, saying Monday that Democrats caused the affordability problem and his administration is fixing it. This inconsistency reveals a fundamental tension in the Trump approach. On one hand, his team recognizes they need to address economic anxiety seriously. They're scheduling a national tour, creating visual messaging, bringing in testimonial speakers. On the other hand, Trump himself seems unable or unwilling to stay focused on that message for extended periods. He gravitates toward cultural grievances, attacks on opponents, and celebration of his own performance. Let's consider what the data actually shows about the economy right now. According to the information available, prices and inflation have increased in 2025. Many economists point to Trump's tariff policies as contributing factors. The president faces criticism not just from Democrats but from within his own party. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, once a top ally, has criticized him for not doing more to address high living costs and focusing too much on foreign affairs. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski called the idea that affordability is a hoax troubling, suggesting the president needs to talk to regular people in grocery stores. The tariff issue is particularly contentious. While Trump touts tariffs as generating revenue, opponents note that Pennsylvania companies paid approximately $5.7 billion in tariffs in the year ending August 2025, up dramatically from $2.1 billion the previous year. These costs get passed to consumers through higher prices, which directly contradicts the administration's message about bringing prices down. Trump defended his approach in an interview published the day of the speech, telling Politico he would consider more carve-outs for goods impacted by tariffs that Americans find too expensive. The administration has already made some adjustments, rolling back tariffs on certain food imports and floating ideas like 50-year mortgages as ways to address affordability concerns. These moves suggest responsiveness to political pressure, but they also indicate the administration is still searching for solutions. Now let's analyze the location choice and what it tells us. Monroe County, where Mount Pocono is situated, flipped from Biden in 2020 to Trump in 2024. It's a region with many New York City transplants seeking affordable housing, and it relies heavily on Pocono Mountains tourism for employment. This makes it a perfect symbolic location for an affordability message. It's politically competitive, economically sensitive, and represents the kind of swing territory Republicans need to hold in 2026. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, a Democrat, responded before the event by saying Trump's assessment of the economy doesn't reflect reality on the ground in communities where many Pennsylvanians vote. And for him, Shapiro argued that Trump's tariffs and economic policies have raised grocery prices, shut out markets for farmers, hurt manufacturers, and dramatically increased the cost of living. This sets up a clear contrast for Pennsylvania voters to evaluate. What are the possible outcomes from this tour? Let's think through several scenarios. First, the optimistic scenario for the administration. If prices do begin to moderate in coming months, if wage growth continues, if voters start to feel economic improvements in their daily lives, then Trump's message could gain traction. The administration is pointing to savings they say will take effect in 2026. If those materialize, they can claim vindication. The tour would look prescient, an early effort to educate voters before the evidence became undeniable. Second, the pessimistic scenario. If prices remain high or increase further, if tariff costs continue mounting, if voters see no improvement in their financial situations, then this tour could backfire spectacularly. The gap between Trump's claims about rapidly falling prices and voters' lived experiences would become impossible to ignore. The messaging about lower prices and bigger paychecks would seem out of touch, even insulting to struggling families. Democrats would have ammunition for 2026 campaigns, pointing to Trump's Pennsylvania speech as evidence he doesn't understand ordinary Americans' challenges. Third, the mixed scenario. Perhaps the most likely. Some economic indicators improve, while others don't. Some voters see benefits from policy changes while others continue struggling. The political impact becomes murky, contested, interpreted differently by different constituencies. In this scenario, the effectiveness of Trump's messaging tour depends largely on which voters in which districts feel which effects. Swing district outcomes become hyperlocalized, depending on specific economic conditions in specific communities. There's also a messaging scenario to consider. Even if economic conditions don't change dramatically, effective communication might shift perceptions. Political scientists know that people's economic feelings are influenced by partisan identification, media consumption, and leadership messaging, not just their personal financial situations. If Trump and Republicans can create a narrative that resonates, that frames economic developments favorably, they might improve their political position regardless of underlying data. But here's the challenge. Trump's tendency to veer off message, to attack opponents, to engage with cultural issues rather than staying focused on economics, could undermine this effort. Reports from Pennsylvania show him spending significant time on topics completely unrelated to affordability. For a tour specifically designed to address economic anxiety, this represents a strategic problem. You can't effectively message on inflation while simultaneously ranting about Somalia and windmills. The Democratic response has been sharp and immediate. The Democratic National Committee accused Trump of dismissing Americans' concerns, of telling them to have patience while calling affordability a hoax. They argue that everyday Americans are stretching their paychecks further and deserve solutions, not what they call misleading rhetoric. Representative Omar responded to Trump's attacks by calling him a national embarrassment with no economic policies to tout. This brings us to the question of empathy. Multiple reports suggest Trump advisors are urging him to take a more empathetic tone with struggling Americans. One advisor referenced Bill Clinton's famous line about feeling people's pain, suggesting Trump needs to convey that he cares when people face high prices at grocery stores. But empathy has never been Trump's natural political mode. He's more comfortable as a fighter, an attacker, a celebrator of wins. Whether he can or will adjust his style for this tour remains an open question. Let's talk about what this means for the 2026 midterms. History suggests presidents' parties typically lose seats in midterm elections. Trump toured extensively before the 2018 midterms during his first term, but Republicans still lost the House majority. The current Republican House majority is narrow, making them vulnerable. If they lose the House, Trump faces investigations, potential obstruction of his agenda, and a much harder path for his final 2 years. The White House clearly understands this risk. Chief of Staff Susie Wiles said Trump will campaign like it's 2024 again, suggesting an intensive schedule of rallies and events. Pennsylvania will likely see many more visits. But the effectiveness of rallies depends on message discipline and whether Trump can convince voters he's addressing their real concerns rather than his personal grievances. Consider the testimonials Trump featured. Workers who benefit from no taxes on tips and overtime represent specific policy accomplishments. These are defendable positions that connect to middle-class economics. The challenge is whether Trump can keep the focus there or whether he'll be distracted by other topics. The Pennsylvania speech suggests distraction remains a serious risk. There is also the international dimension. Trump has faced criticism for spending too much time on foreign affairs, traveling globally while Americans worry about grocery prices. He defended this in Pennsylvania, arguing that his international deals bring trillions of dollars to America. He framed foreign trips as actually being about domestic economics. Whether voters accept this framing or see it as deflection will shape the tour's success. Let me address the fact-checking questions that arise from Trump's claims. He said newly created jobs are going entirely to American citizens and that wage growth for factory workers and miners is strong. Reports indicate these claims don't appear supported by publicly available evidence. This pattern of making dubious statistical claims could undermine his broader message if media coverage focuses on inaccuracies rather than policy substance. The Republican National Committee distributed talking points to surrogates urging them to blame Biden for current prices while arguing Trump is repairing the mess and fighting to bring down costs. This coordinated messaging suggests they recognize the political vulnerability, but also shows they're sticking with the blame-shifting strategy rather than fully owning the current economy. Whether that works when Trump has been president for nearly a year is questionable. Now let's consider different voter perspectives. For Trump's supporters at the rally, many seemed energized and receptive to his message. They cheered his attacks on opponents, responded to his economic claims, and created an enthusiastic atmosphere. These are the base voters Republicans need to turn out in 2026. But what about persuadable voters, independents, moderate Republicans who voted for Democrats in November? Do they find Trump's approach convincing or off-putting? Interviews with attendees revealed mixed feelings. One retired banker noted his egg prices had dropped, but his energy costs had doubled. He said Trump is optimistic like a salesman, but has a lot of work to do. A retired bartender who voted for Trump said she wishes he could do better. These are supporters expressing genuine concerns, suggesting the president hasn't fully addressed their economic anxieties despite his claims. The casino setting itself is symbolically interesting. Casinos represent both economic aspiration and the reality that most people lose money gambling. One attendee mentioned increasing her casino visits because you've got to be in it to win it, while admitting she's not winning. There's something almost metaphorical about Trump delivering an economic message in a casino, a place where the odds favor the house and most people walk away with less than they came in with. Let's discuss what would constitute success for this tour. From the administration's perspective, success means shifting polling numbers on economic approval, reducing the salience of affordability as a voting issue, and improving Republicans' midterm prospects. They need voters in swing districts to believe things are getting better and that Trump's policies deserve credit. They need to blunt Democratic attacks about tariffs and prices. From Democrats' perspective, success means keeping economic anxiety high, tying Republican candidates to Trump's policies, and winning the House majority in 2026. They need voters to see Trump's claims as divorced from reality, to remember him calling affordability a hoax, to believe his tariffs are raising their costs. They need the tour to be seen as ineffective or even counterproductive. For voters themselves, success would mean actually experiencing lower prices and bigger paychecks. No amount of political messaging matters if people can't afford groceries or see their wages stagnated. The ultimate test isn't what Trump says in Pennsylvania or anywhere else. It's what happens in millions of households across the country. The media coverage of this event has been notably critical, even from outlets that sometimes provide favorable Trump coverage. Multiple organizations highlighted how he veered off message, mocked affordability, spent time on irrelevant topics, and made questionable claims. This coverage matters because it shapes how people who didn't attend the rally understand what happened. If the dominant narrative is that Trump can't stay focused on economics, that undermines the tour's purpose. Think about the challenges ahead for this tour. Trump must visit multiple states, deliver multiple speeches, stay consistently on message about affordability while avoiding distractions. He must do this while also governing, managing international crises, dealing with congressional Republicans, and handling his various legal situations. The bandwidth required for an effective nationwide tour is substantial, and Trump's tendency toward improvisation and digression makes consistent messaging difficult. There's also the question of policy substance. What specifically is Trump proposing to do about affordability that he hasn't already done? He's implemented tariffs, which critics say raise prices. He's proposed eliminating taxes on tips and overtime, which helps some workers but doesn't directly lower prices. He's made some tariff adjustments, but maintaining tariffs overall, without new, concrete policy proposals. The tour risks being seen as purely political, campaign-style events rather than substantive governance. The comparison to Trump's 2018 midterm campaigning is instructive. Despite extensive rallying, Republicans lost the House. Trump's personal popularity and rally crowds don't always translate to victory for other Republican candidates. Local factors, individual candidates' qualities, and district-specific issues matter enormously. A tour can help with national messaging, but can't overcome poor candidates or unfavorable local conditions. Pennsylvania Democrats are already weaponizing Trump's visit. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee ran ads attacking local Republican Congressman Rob Bresnahan for stock trading. Scranton's Democratic mayor, who's running against Bresnahan, called him self-serving. This shows how Democrats plan to localize their response, tying Republican candidates to Trump while also highlighting their individual vulnerabilities. Let's consider the long-term implications beyond 2026. If Trump successfully shifts the economic narrative, if Republicans hold the House, he gains significant political capital for his final 2 years. He can claim mandate continuation, push ambitious policy goals, and position himself as a consequential two-term president. If the tour fails and Republicans lose the House, Trump becomes a lame duck, facing investigations and obstruction, with his legacy at risk. There's also the question of Trump's potential influence beyond his presidency. He teased a third term in Pennsylvania despite constitutional prohibitions. Whether this was joking or testing reactions is unclear, but it suggests he's thinking about his post-2028 role. If he maintains Republican loyalty through successful economic messaging now, he could shape the party's 2028 presidential primary and remain a kingmaker. The international community is watching this tour closely. America's economic policies, especially tariffs, affect global trade relationships. If Trump's domestic political need for lower prices leads to tariff modifications that changes calculations for European and Asian trade partners, foreign governments are trying to understand whether Trump's economic nationalism will moderate under political pressure or remain unshakable. Businesses are also closely monitoring developments. Tariff uncertainty makes planning difficult. Companies don't know whether to prepare for sustained high tariff environments or expect modifications. The tour and Trump's statements provide signals about administration thinking, helping businesses make investment and supply chain decisions. For ordinary Americans trying to make sense of all this, several things matter. First, watch your own economic situation. Are prices actually coming down in your grocery store, at your gas station? Are your wages increasing? Your personal experience is the most reliable indicator of policy effectiveness. Second, recognize that political messaging and economic reality often diverge. Politicians of all parties claim credit for good news and deflect blame for bad news. Try to separate rhetoric from results. Third, pay attention to specific policies and their likely effects. Eliminating taxes on tips helps service workers. Tariffs raise prices on imported goods. Each policy has winners and losers. Understanding who benefits helps you evaluate whether policies serve your interests. Fourth, remember that economic conditions result from many factors beyond any president's control. Global supply chains, monetary policy, technological change, demographic shifts all matter. Presidents get too much credit when things go well and too much blame when they don't. As we move forward, several key indicators will tell us how this tour succeeds or fails. Watch polling on Trump's economic approval and generic congressional ballot preferences. If Republicans improve, the tour is working. Watch specific swing district races, especially in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and other early tour stops. If Republican candidates gain ground, Trump's message is resonating. Watch economic data itself. If prices moderate and wages rise, Trump can claim vindication regardless of whether his policies caused it. Watch Trump's message discipline and subsequent tour stops. Does he stay focused on affordability or continue veering into culture war? Topics: watch Democratic responses and whether they gain traction. Watch media coverage patterns and whether narratives shift over time. Watch what specific new policies, if any, emerge from this tour. Is it just messaging or does it drive actual policy changes? The Pennsylvania event represents a critical moment in Trump's second term. With nearly a year completed and midterms approaching, his political standing faces a crucial test. Americans' economic anxieties are real and deep. Whether Trump can address them effectively while maintaining his distinctive political style will determine Republican prospects in 2026 and shape his ultimate legacy. This tour is an experiment in whether Trump can discipline himself for strategic purposes, whether he can be the president his advisors want him to be rather than simply being himself. The Pennsylvania speech suggests the jury is still out. He delivered economic messages but couldn't resist digressions. He brought forward helpful testimonials but also spent time on irrelevant attacks. He claimed success but also mocked those concerned about affordability. Ultimately, voters will decide whether they believe Trump is making their lives more affordable. No amount of rallies, no quantity of signs proclaiming lower prices and bigger paychecks can substitute for actual improvements in people's financial situations. Trump is betting he can message his way through economic concerns until conditions improve. Democrats are betting economic anxiety will overcome Trump's political skills. The next year will reveal who's right. Thank you for your time. These 50 minutes have explored what happened in Pennsylvania, what it means for American politics, and where things might be heading. The story is far from over. This was merely the first stop on what promises to be an extensive tour. Whether it succeeds in reshaping the economic narrative or fails to overcome voters' lived experiences will define the next phase of Trump's presidency and American politics more broadly.